In this video, we'll be discussing an introduction to disinfection. The California State Board has specific regulations, and they're kind of not clear. Okay, they're very clear in the fact that they tell you that for a disinfectant to be used, it must have an EPA registration number. And then it adds that we can use sodium hypochlorite and or hydrogen peroxide, which do not have a quote EPA registration number. So how does that work? So I went to the EPA website and I did a little bit of research, and what I found was that there's two types of registrations. Number one is an EPA establishment I can't even talk. An EPA establishment registered number, and those are for the companies who manufacture and sell hydrogen peroxide, who do the hypochlorites and such like that, because these actual chemicals don't have their own physical number, but the establishment number covers that. Otherwise, the EPA does issue a registration number for certain disinfectants and such, and at the top, quaternary ammonium compound is an EPA registered disinfectant, and it kills the virus, the fungus, and bacteria. Okay, and those are the three things it says, the state board says it has to kill. So that one automatically meets it, and that's the traditional one. If you're looking at other companies who use like barbicide and marvicide, they don't use an ammonia-based chemical, they use a sodium-based chemical. And so you always need to make sure that you're reading the ingredients. In other words, you need an SDS. You need to know exactly what the chemical is, and on your SDS will be the EPA number, whether it's an establishment number or the registration number of that actual product. That's where you'll find that information. Now, alcohol used at 70% is classified as a disinfectant. There's no EPA registration number because it's a hazardous waste and you can't dispose of it. 100 years ago, when I took the state board, and for many years after that, we had to have a little container of alcohol on our station, and we sanitized our hands with alcohol. And we did that for years. And then the state board said, no, that's not healthy. We're going to go to soap and water. Okay? Washing your hands with soap and water is more effective as an antiseptic method to prevent the spread of germs. Then, when California subscribed to the national exam sent us right back to the alcohol. So now you have to sanitize your hands with a hand sanitizer, which is going to be either 30 to 60% alcohol in a pump. Okay, and it's not really good for you. When you take your state board, that's what you need to use. But once again, if you're in a salon, basic hand washing is still the most effective way to prevent the spread of bacteria, the contact bacteria. Sodium hypochlorite or calcium hypochlorite is laundry bleach, and it's like Clorox, but you have to get the industrial strength for it to be strong enough. When you go to the grocery store and you're looking at the chlorine bleaches, you'll see the store brand, real cheap, then you'll see a private label, cheap, then you see your Clorox and your Purex. Clorox is really good, but it needs to be the industrial strength. Otherwise, it doesn't have a high enough percentage. We have to have at least 5.25% active ingredient in our calcium or sodium hypochlorite. If you're in New York requires 10%. So when you're looking at a state board question, and I had this on my board, and I'm one of those people, I never forget what I hear or what I read. And when I took my state board exam, they said, when using sodium or calcium hypochlorite as a disinfectant, what is the percentage of active ingredient? And I went, nobody told me that. Nobody said anything to me about that, and I get really offended and I get all huffy, because my teachers didn't tell me that. Nobody mentioned that to me, and I was a little miffed. And then about 2 or 3 pages over, the next question said, when using sodium or calcium hypochlorite at 25% disinfectant, what is the contact time? So that question answered the other question. Now I can go back and change that answer. Now what I don't remember is what I guessed for the contact time, but it's 20 minutes. Okay, and so those questions like that, they're on your state board exam. They expect you to know alcohol at 70% is also 20 minutes. But I can also use an alcohol wipe. So the state board has kind of changed things around a little bit. And when I'm using it as a disinfectant, I'm at 30 to 60%. And when I'm spraying my tools or using it as a wipe down and a septic, then that's what it's going to be, and then I'll be okay. Now, non-toxic hypochlorous acids, hydrogen peroxide at 6%, and ozone is listed on the EPA establishment number. So you can use ozone as a disinfectant. And I thought that's interesting, because remember on our steamer for our skincare, we have that ozone generator. And the ozone generator releases the oxygen gas, and what that does is it destroys bacteria. So now we have another living proof that that's effective. Then the oldies, which they'll probably never hear you again, phenol is also carbolic acid at 5%. Formalin was extremely popular way back, and it's a formaldehyde-based chemical, but it causes cancer. So we don't use that anymore. Now when you look at the EPA registered devices, I found that to be extremely interesting, because when you do your Article 12 health and safety and you get the health and safety definitions, you want to get, when you open the state board website and you do regulations, it's just going to come up with the heading and the title number. So you want the health and safety section 977, and that's for this class, week 6 in Cosmo 30. And it talks about, I'm reading it kind of over the camera right now, because it talks about EPA registration, and they don't say what kind. So this is exactly what it says. The products used must include a label from the manufacturer that indicates the EPA registration. And it doesn't say registration number. It says registration. So what they're telling you is it can be an establishment registration, or it can be an EPA registered chemical. You have those two choices, and devices come under the establishment number, and those include your dry heat sterilizer, your steam heat, the ultraviolet, the UV lights, any I can't even think of the word I'm looking for right now. Any box you stick your stuff in to sanitize it. The UV, dry heat, steam heat, all of those, and those are basically used for electrology tools, but they can be used, like for instance in your skincare center, you should have a UV sanitizer, so that when you take your tools out of the disinfectant and you dry them, you put them in there. That way they won't rust if you don't get them completely dry. But when you're disinfecting your brushes, whether they're makeup brushes, which you can use a brush cleaner for, by the way, and that's okay, that evaporates quickly. But the electric brushes on my brushing machine, I have to wash those with soap and water, rinse them. They have to be put in a like a quat type disinfectant, and then you have to rinse that out, and then you dry them. But brushes, those kind of brushes aren't going to dry. So in a UV sanitizer, the heat from the UV dries them more quickly, and it prevents them from molding. So a UV sanitizer is very important to have in the esthetician room. The antiseptics, and we'll do the definitions. Disinfectants kill the microorganisms. antiseptics only retard their growth, although it may kill some of the not so ornery ones, the ones that are difficult to kill. The most common is soap and water, your alcohol, and 3% hydrogen peroxide. Notice that hydrogen peroxide is 6%, is a disinfectant. Hydrogen peroxide at 3% is an antiseptic. Then I have 2% tincture of iodine, and the word tincture means alcoholic content, and it is a steptic. Now the word steptic means to constrict, so it actually helps stop the bleeding. So if you're doing the, when you do the zip thingy, you know how sometimes it oozes out and it just keeps oozing lymph? The iodine is a vasoconstrictor and it helps stop that. I'm not necessarily recommending it because it burns like you would leave burn. I buy the decolorized iodine, and I keep it for my kids because when you get like a flea bite or a mosquito bite, spider bite, if you take the iodine and you put it on the bite, it pulls the toxin out and stops the itch. And if you don't scratch it, it doesn't hurt. It's fine. Okay, but if you happen to scratch and then you put the iodine on, it's like, and you're going, oh my goodness, that does not feel good. So I would not use necessarily iodine, but they do have powdered and steptics called alum. So I have liquid or powdered alum that also helps stop the bleeding. It doesn't feel good, but it doesn't sting as bad as the iodine does. The one that is prohibited is the Steptic Pencil, which is very commonly sold in the men's section with your shaving equipment, because a guy, when he's shaving, very often cuts himself, and so have a Steptic, what they call a Steptic Pencil, and you just put it on it and it stops the bleeding. However, now the germ is on the Steptic Pencil, which is a solid form, so the bacteria is sitting there because it doesn't destroy bacteria. Okay, it stops the bleeding. It's a vasoconstrictor. So now I've got my germs sitting there, possibly breeding, which is why it's not allowed to use in a salon. But the liquid or powdered form is, because I can dampen a Q-tip, and with a Q-tip apply it to the area where I want to stop the bleeding. In manicuring, it's very common when you're using the nippers around your nail to draw blood. The state board calls that a blood spill, and I'm going, are you serious? To me, a blood spill is a slit jugular vein. Blood spitting out, you're going to die. And in the new rules and regulations for state board, they do make that definition. It has to be like so much blood, and they give you a definition of it. But what we're dealing with is, if you're shaving with an electric razor and you get a razor burn, okay, or if you're nipping and you draw a little bit of blood, if you're extracting and you draw a little bit of blood, the proper first aid. And that's something that you have to be prepared to demonstrate at your state board exam. And you'll, clean it, apply an antiseptic, apply a Band-Aid, and if it's you, apply a glove, and then you can finish the service. At one of the state board exams, one of my cosmetology students was adjusting the lever on the chair, and it cut her hand. And I mean, it cut it because she had a towel on it, and that towel was full of blood. So by the time she applied the pressure, applied the bandage, and then got her glove on, then she proceeded with her state board, and that was okay, and she passed. They know that you're going to cut yourself, especially if you're a hairdresser. Okay, sometime between now and then, if you haven't cut yourself, you will. Seasoned hairdressers, I still cut myself. Boom, and I'll get a little twitch, or I'll be like this, and I'm cutting, and you get a little nick, because my scissors are sharp. When I'm cutting my children's hair, sometimes, and you nick yourself, and they know you're going to do that. So if you do it at the state board, it's not a panic. Just put it down, do the proper first aid, and proceed. Manicuring, and you're not going to draw blood on a client anymore because you're not using a live person, you're using a plastic head. So now they have to give you a simulated injury. You nipped the finger, the index finger, or the ring finger, or the thumb. They're going to tell you a specific appendage that you cut, and they want to see you apply first aid. Estheticians, they're going to say you drew blood on the forehead. Don't ask me how. I have no idea what you could do other than dermaplaning, which is illegal to draw blood on the forehead, but that's where you'll do yours. You know, and so I'm not sure where the hairdressers do theirs, but I'm sure Mr. Smiles will tell you when you're getting ready for your state board exam, you'll know exactly what you're supposed to do. So the word steptic means to constrict. Steptic pencils are prohibited. So as you do this week's assignment, week 6, then, and you're looking at your health and safety rules and identifying your words, you'll get a really good idea on what to expect.